Well, hello, my name's Louise Savage of Louise Savage Muses. An extremely warm welcome to my channel. Welcome back if you're a returning viewer, and an equally warm welcome if you are joining me for the very first time. So I thought I would start this year by picking a book of the month. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's the best book I've read that month, but it might be the book that I have been surprised by, or might not have found myself reading, that I really want to talk about in a little bit more depth perhaps than I would, for example, in a wrap-up. So the book that I've chosen to talk about this month, my book of the month for January, and I'm hoping to continue this throughout the year, we'll see how we go. My book of the month for January is Thin Air by Michelle Paver. Now, Michelle Paver is a great favourite of mine. She wrote The Chronicles of Ancient Darkness. The first one is called Wolf Brother. I think there are about 7, 8 or 9 of them. And I read them to my 2 youngest children when they were probably around about 7, 8, 9, that kind of age. And we carried on reading them until they were much older than that, because they were utterly gripping. And they focus on this young boy who is adopted by the wolf in a kind of primitive Stone Age world. And he goes on off on lots of adventures with his good friend, etc, etc. And they are really tense, gripping, wonderful stories. And if you've never read them, I thoroughly recommend that you go off and seek them out. But Michelle Paver has also written some novels for adults as well. Not as many, but she's written another ghost story called Dark Matter, because Thin Air is a ghost story. And that's set right up in the north of Europe, where it doesn't really get light, and it's about a young man who goes off, I think in the 1920s, I want to say. I have read that some time ago. And also she wrote, I'm just looking on my shelves because I'm sure I've got it here somewhere, a fantastic gothic novel called Wakenhurst, which only came out a couple of years ago, which I really enjoyed. I can't see it. Anyway, I'm not here to talk to you about that. I'm here to rave about this book, Thin Air. I love this because it's not like anything else I've ever read before in my life. It is about a young doctor called Dr. Stephen Pierce, and the story is narrated completely from his perspective, almost completely. And he is the younger brother of Kit's Pierce, who is an adventurer, an explorer, a mountaineer. And Kit's has put together this expedition to go to Kanchenjunga, which is one of the peaks in the Himalayas. It really exists. It's a real mountain. I hadn't heard of it, but that's probably my ignorance. And it is third highest, I think, of all the Himalayan peaks, and notoriously difficult to conquer, because unlike Everest, which is sort of like that, Kanchenjunga is this kind of shape. It's a very long, bulky shape, and I think there are lots of kind of ice shelves and so on, and it's really difficult to get to the summit. The novel is set in 1935. So Kit's has put together this expedition, and at the last minute his medic drops out. I can't quite remember why. And so his brother, who also has climbed mountains with him before, his younger brother, Dr. Stephen Pierce, he gets in touch with him and says, please can you come with us, because his younger brother happens to be a doctor. So he goes in the role of the medic on the expedition. I think there are only 5 of them who go to climb this mountain. Now, when they were children, these 2 boys, one of their favourite books, which is read to them by their nanny, because they're from a very sort of well-to-do background. They went to Winchester Public School. They come from, money. So when they were boys, they read the adventures of Edmund Lyle, who was a previous mountaineer who had attempted to climb Kanchenjunga and had failed, and it had been disastrous. There were several people on the expedition who died, and up to this point nobody has conquered the summit. So these men go off on this expedition to climb it, and it starts with Stephen he accidentally stumbles into the living room of one of the men who was on that Lyle expedition. And there's a lot of kind of secrecy around it. There's this book published, but he stumbles into Charles Tennant's room quite by accident, because Charles Tennant's daughter has kept them well away. They've gone to Charles Tennant's place deliberately to try and meet him. He's one of Kit's heroes, and Kit doesn't get to meet him, but Stephen does, because he inadvertently walks through the wrong door and comes across this man, and they have a conversation. And during the course of that conversation, this chill descends. There's something, Stephen realises that the account that they've understood from their childhood of this expedition doesn't quite ring true. And this begins to haunt him, and that's kind of where the haunting begins. And so the expedition starts off in Darjeeling, and then it climbs up into the mountains. And obviously there are lots of Sherpas as well. It's quite interesting to see how the part that they play in the expedition, and their sort of superstitions about the land and the snow and belongings and those kind of things really, really play into the whole tension that builds as they climb this mountain. I've got to be really careful now because I don't want to give away spoilers, but it becomes increasingly creepy and tense, and it's so realistic. And there is a kind of ghost in this story. Well, there is a ghost, and the ghost is so real. And I am not, any of you who've been watching me for a while will know that ghost stories have never been a real thing for me, but I don't know whether it's something to do with getting older or whatever, but I am really beginning to enjoy them, and I love that aspect of this kind of I don't believe in ghosts, but I believed in this one. So the writing is brilliant, and the whole sort of description of climbing that mountain and the effects of altitude on the human body, because of course it's being narrated by Stephen, who's a medic, is really interesting. It's something that he's fascinated in. Now, maybe, you know, I went to Ecuador this summer and climbed at altitude for the first time in my life, and I found the whole thing of how it was affecting my body really fascinating. So maybe that's one of the reasons why I enjoyed it. I don't think it's by any means the only reason. And of course, that's the title, Thin Air, is to do with the idea of a ghost, but it's also to do with the idea that, you know, is this ghost real, or is it to do with the fact that people who are walking at altitude hallucinate, have very strange dreams, they don't think straight, all sorts, it addles your brain. So that's another thing that's brilliant. Now, the other thing that I really, really enjoyed about this story was Stephen himself. If you are somebody who, like me, grew up with The Count of Monte Cristo, for example, as one of your favourite novels, or some of H. Rider Haggard's books, King Solomon's Mines, that kind of thing. I loved an adventure story as a child, and what I really think is so clever about this book is that Michelle Paver manages to totally convincingly adopt the voice of a male adventurer of that kind of era. You know, Victorian, just post-Victorian, Edwardian, whatever era. And I so enjoyed that. There's a kind of slightly scientific element to the way that Stephen looks at the world. And also his rationalism is battling against this idea that he might be being haunted in some way. I love that conflict between the rational and the irrational, and appearance and reality, which is such a thread, isn't it, through classic literature that stands the test of time, tends to explore those kind of themes. The other thing that I really enjoyed in this novel was the dynamic between Stephen and Kit's, his older brother. They do not get on. Kit's is really quite unpleasant to Stephen. There's obviously a lot of baggage from when they were children, some of which is dipped into in the novel. But as a portrayal of a sort of antagonistic sibling relationship, I thought that was fabulous as well. And also the sense of history, you know, the idea that when you are going on one of these adventures and trying to be the first to achieve something, the imprint of those previous people who've made that very same endeavour become increasingly significant. It's a bit like if you've been on holiday somewhere and then you meet someone else who's been there as well. It creates this, not exactly a bond, but you've got a talking point in common, haven't you? And you've got similar but perhaps different impressions of that place. So I suppose the sense of place in this novel is fantastic. And by the end of it, I genuinely felt like I'd been up there myself. Which, again, you know, this little lady sat here is never going to climb the equivalent of Everest. However, I kind of feel like I have. So it's another example of a novel that sort of takes you to a different place, a different experience. You completely embrace it because the writing is so very good. So I'm raving about this novel because I absolutely flipping loved it. And I commend it to you. It's a very short read. You could read it, you know, in a couple of hours at the most. I certainly just sat down and raced through it. So there we go. I commend this to you. My first book of the month of 2024, Thin Air by Michelle Paver. Over and out. Happy reading, everyone. Take care and bye.